Text-to-voice synthesis provided by Vidnami. 1856 election, an explanatory correction. January 24, 2021 by Anna von Reitz. Franklin Pierce was the seated President of the United States Federal Republic in 1856. This is the American Federal Republic we are talking about, not the United States municipal government run by the Pope and friends. Pierce was not re-nominated for a second term by his own Democratic political party, and so Pierce was replaced by another Democrat candidate, James Buchanan, in the November election of 1856. I was incorrect in the earlier article, Situation Report, the 24th of January 2021, when I called Pierce the last lawfully elected president of our country, and said he was elected in 1856. Pierce was actually elected in 1852 and shut out of the election in 1856. Franklin Pierce didn't actually support slavery as an institution, but he recognized the sovereignty of the Southern states, and their right to conduct their business, and slavery was part of their business and economy as they saw fit. Thus, he was the last president to uphold and enforce the constitutional limits on federal power. And that is what I am trying to get at. Every other president from Buchanan onward has in fact trespassed on the sovereignty of the states and the people of this country, and to a greater or lesser extent, has committed treason against us. This issue of individual state sovereignty within their borders is the separate, underlying, and far more important issue that underlies the Civil War. It still hasn't been resolved to this day. The states had long agreed to act together in international and global politics, but they never agreed to sacrifice their individual economic interests to any federal authority, and that is what sparked the conflict. No doubt that some of what followed was motivated by anti-slavery sentiments, but perhaps a great deal more of it was prompted by the British Parliament's investments in Egyptian cotton and the ability of American cotton producers to still undercut them in the European markets. Slavery gave the Americans a competitive edge that the Brits and their American Tory supporters objected to for economic reasons. Pierce stood in their way and stood up for states' rights. Buchanan was a king's man and used the divisive moral issue of slavery as a smokescreen to evade both the constitutional limitations and the economic motivations involved. Everything since Buchanan has served to enrich foreign interests and erode the limits on federal power that our forefathers clearly mandated and intended. Lincoln and later, Ulysses S. Grant, inherited this murky mess and never resolved it, with the result that we are still facing it today, still struggling over issues of enslavement of various kinds, still struggling over the limits of federal encroachment, still wrestling with British and other European interests, and still haven't completed the reconstruction of a third of our government. We must face up to these facts and admit these problems before we can solve them. The states must assemble and the people of this country must speak to these issues, because nobody else on this planet has the power and the right and the responsibility to do so. In doing so, we must also realize that our federal subcontractors have their own history quite apart from our own, and their own self-interest, which informs many of their actions. Their self-interest, which is to garner more and more federal power, and more money at the expense of the states and people, must be countered by enforcement of their constitutional limitations and the public law of our country if we are to survive as anything but a morally bankrupt shell of what we are meant to be, living under the cruel thumb of corporate feudalism, in an upside-down world where things rule over people.